What's up, cuties? In this video, I am going to be talking about books that readers love but can't ethically recommend. This video is going to be completely full of the most canceled authors by you. Those of you who are viewers who do not necessarily have bookstagrams or booktubes, but those of you who are readers who are a part of the community, even if you don't have platforms. I wanted to make this the third video in my series where I talk about books that I love but can't ethically recommend, because the first two videos in the series were me talking about me and my reading experience. And at the end of the second video that I did in this series, I asked y'all to comment down below with books that you love but just ethically you don't stand by. Maybe this is because the author has done something really horrible that you just can't forgive. Maybe it is because the text itself has harmful ideologies in it or depicts certain groups in a toxic and harmful way, and you just don't support that per your own ethical code. These are simply examples. I started this series because I think it's really important to talk about books with nuance. What does it mean when we have an author who writes an incredible book but is a shitty person, or who writes a book that's otherwise good but has some thematic issues in it, issues that can be educated and edited out and sometimes just needs to be a change of heart on the author's side. Self-work that author has to do. We all have things to unlearn, and authors are no different. But does that necessarily mean to throw the book away? Does that necessarily mean to censor the work itself? Does that necessarily mean that you can't enjoy it in the privacy of your own home? Those videos are going to be linked down below. I have also done one where I give alternative recommendations. Perhaps you should try reading these books instead of this book, sort of thing. This video is going to be entirely comments from you, and I'm going to be reacting to them and ranking the most canceled and problematic authors. This video is dedicated to y'all, those of you who comment, make my channel what it is. You help shape my worldview. You help challenge me. Do we always agree? No, but I'm always grateful for the input. Jesse on YouTube wouldn't be what it is without my viewers, and I'm just really grateful that you guys took the time to share the following comments that I'm about to read. Starting with TJ Klune.
Surprising absolutely no one.
This comment says, I think mine is a very common one. The House in the Cerulean Sea. I loved that book, and then I learned about the author using literal indigenous trauma as inspiration and how he never backs down on it. It was a really good book, but I cannot in good conscience recommend it to anybody or talk about it in a way that someone might pick it up based on my review. I have a big issue with the way the book community has responded to TJ Klune in The House in the Cerulean Sea. I've spoken about how there is a phenomenon in the book community where we only cancel authors if their books aren't super popular. It took a very long time. It took many years of Jewish people, trans readers, readers of color talking about the issues in the Harry Potter series. None of those criticisms were new. And it wasn't until her transphobia became undeniable, right? When she started loudly sharing problematic views on transness and trans children, when she started donating large amounts of numbers to homophobic charities and backing legislature that attacks queer people. Then suddenly book reviewers were like, oh, okay, now we're going to get rid of those books because now the reviewer looks bad for reading it. There's a lot of fake performative canceling in the book community. TJ Klune, a lot of readers like myself took the book off of their TBR.
I'm so glad that I didn't read it
after that, but there is a lot of readers in the book community who claim to be allies, who know about what TJ Klune got his inspiration from, and still stand by the book, pretend the criticisms aren't there so that they can participate in the hype and being seen reading the book. Do you see what I'm saying? I find it very fake and performative and problematic. If TJ Klune's book was less popular, they would be so proud being seen taking a stand by not reading it. It's the same thing with Sarah J. Maas, and I'm not going to get into arguments about like whether or not she's a Zionist or blah, blah, blah. I'm just using her as an example. This is an author who has been critiqued a lot, right? But because she's so popular, people are still gonna read the book and feel comfortable reading it regardless of the critiques. And it has gotten to the point where now TJ has a new book out, and because the book community tolerated it, now it's just been kind of swept under the rug. Gross. When I read And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, I absolutely loved and thought the story, characters, and twists were incredible. It became one of my top 5 books. The version I read had the poem that's the plot device as 10 Little Soldiers. Then I learned that not only had that been updated from 10 Little Indians, but the original was actually 10 Little N-words. There had been a few passages that were very racist and or colonialist that had been edited out from the original. and I was very disappointed, to say the least. While I still find the story and characters compelling, I can't in good conscience recommend it without mentioning the original issues. It's weird to see the popularity rise of Agatha Christie as a Black thriller and mystery reader, and I'm not interested in any of Agatha Christie's works, but also it's not surprising that she's racist, and of course she was racist. Like, this is not a shock. Anytime I go into a classic from a white author, I think it's silly to assume that there wouldn't be any racism in that text. But what I personally find disturbing is that her racism was edited out of the book so that it could keep being read and keep being popular. That's insane to me. You literally did work that the author didn't even do because you want to keep selling this book and you want people to keep enjoying it. So you edited somebody else's work to take the racism out so that we all look good reading it now. And that's credit the author shouldn't be getting. The author doesn't get to take credit for like all the rest of the good things in the book while we just don't talk about the racism. I think that that's like the epitome of white woman privilege. And it just sickens me. Like, if you're gonna read the book, read it in its entirety. If you're gonna stand by the book, say, okay, yeah, this book is racist, but I liked it. Do it with your whole chest. Like, I just don't understand that. It was the same with The Little Prince. This was edited out of The Little Prince, but when I read the audio, there was a passage in there that was shockingly racist. Like, even for the period, I was like, what the hell? And that got edited out so that we can create a narrative of, oh, what's his name? Antoine Saint-Exupéry wrote just like a wonderful, touching story, but that's not actually the story that he wrote. And we have to acknowledge the good and the bad of the story. I get really frustrated with this dichotomy, this idea of like a person or a book is good or it's bad. It furthers the idea, it furthers this narrative that nuance doesn't matter. I can think of no better way to erase who a person actually is, to dehumanize a person, if you take the bad from them. I am a person who makes mistakes and fucks up, and I never want to be described as a good person, because that's not to see me as I really am. I want to be described as a whole person, somebody who has work to do, somebody who has a lot of learning to do, somebody who has made mistakes and will make mistakes. Because when we put people on pedestals, authors included, when they finally make a mistake, they get torn apart, especially if they're brown, especially if it's from people who have been jealous of their success and how they've been doing. And sometimes it's people in your own community who have been jealous of you, and then you make a mistake and it's like, well, now I'm gonna tear you to shreds. We need to see people and authors as what and who they are, the products of society. Society is inherently flawed, and so are we. So of course the book is gonna be flawed. And I get really irritated when people get so incensed when I say a book is problematic or has work to do, because of course it is.
Like, this is not shocking
that someone writes a problematic book. People are problematic, society is problematic. Of course the book is gonna be too. I'm not saying that we need to tar and feather this person, but like, let's be unapologetic. If we can't even admit that there's certain themes in a book, if we're gonna get sensitive to the point where we're gonna be upset if someone else comments on a theme in the book that probably should not have existed, then how are we ever gonna work through these things? It's interesting how every time I make these videos, there's always a few people in the comment sections who are just cannot see past me using the word problematic. And it's just really interesting to watch people's critical thinking shut down because they're offended by the word problematic. It's so interesting. My friend Tammy says, Rage of Dragons makes me so mad because Evan Winter had the audacity to write a matriarchal society but simultaneously fall into all the misogynistic tropes. I felt so bamboozled. This is one of the most liked comments, and this is a comment that I stand behind. In the first video where I talk about books that I love but ethically can't recommend, Rage of Dragons is mentioned. I love this book. It's a West African Black man written fantasy, and it's a revenge story. And I was excited about the matriarchal society and the women characters, but like, rape is used as a plot device for a matriarchal society. It was incredibly, everything Tammy said was correct, but there was also a lot of good about the book, and I still intend on reading the sequel. But I'm also going to be very unapologetic about the fact that it's a problematic book. I am sensitive to how people talk about the sexism in Rage of Dragons, because if you are talking about the sexism in Rage of Dragons, I need to see you also talking about the sexism in white adult male fantasies works, because I have seen some fantasy readers who usually don't speak up on sexism in books by white men getting real up in arms about the sexism in this fantasy written by a Black man. And I'm like, well, let's be mindful of who we criticize and whose mistakes that we see. That's all I'm gonna say. A Little Life made me feel so seen. It's a book that will stay with me for life, but I saw a booktuber say the trauma and descriptions of mental illness in A Little Life was unrealistic. A Little Life is my most hated books of all time, not because of the content, but the way it was handled. Whether or not something is trauma porn depends on the tone and intent behind the inclusion of these topics. As a comparison, not every piece of media that contains sex is porn. To me, A Little Life is so bad and hurtful because it reads like the author was trying to write the saddest book in existence. I didn't know she literally admitted that, but it reads that way. She gleefully included these traumas for shock value as emotional manipulation of the reader and to profit off. It's almost voyeuristic. Look at this sad life I'm describing. Don't you pity Jude yet? While clearly not coming from a point of view of understanding, empathy, or own experience. It's that tone, that repeated victimization, that lack of understanding that makes trauma porn to me, not the content itself. That said, this is all personal opinion. Another person said, people are always surprised when they find out I've never read Harry Potter. And not only I'm not interested in those books because I don't like fantasy, but also because the author is a piece of shit. Sometimes the author's point of view on a certain topic will be reflected in their work, even if it's a small detail. It will be there. Someone else says, I read Ender's Game in middle school and fell in love with it. It was one of my favorite books for ages. When I say I was devastated when I found out about Orson Scott Card, it was not a pleasant day for me. Orson Scott Card wrote Ender's Game, and he is a very proudly, wildly homophobic author. And Ender's Game is a book that I read in my formative years, and I just really, really loved it. So that is another book that I love, but I don't ethically recommend. Someone else says, I do struggle with separating the art from the artist, and there are several authors whose works I'll still read because of childhood nostalgia, but I refuse to purchase their books, new or in any way that gives money to them, as well as not promoting their works, which is the thing that a lot of people do, and I think that that's a really ethical way to go about it. J.K. Turp is one because my siblings and I bonded over the Harry Potter series growing up. Brandon Sanderson is sadly another because of his homophobia, even though his Mistborn series is one my fiance and I bonded over before we were dating and we're just friends. So certain pieces of art I'll separate for my own sanity if they bring me comfort, but the rest I refuse to purchase and will not support the author if they're harmful to the community and others. I think it's gross that the author of A Little Life's only goal was to be traumatizing. That said, the book was a huge comfort, and Jude was a huge comfort for my own experiences. I think the book was too much and accomplished what the author wanted, but it also accomplished so much more. I wouldn't recommend the book because I see how much it hurt people. I'm thankful for what it did to me. Wow, Ender's Game was such a formative experience for me as a reader. I first read Ender's Game as a child and was so intensely connected to Ender's world and backstory as a little kid who was personally navigating the ways I felt isolated and bullied and siloed from other kids as a child who was valued by adults for being smart. Whew, that is something that I very much relate to, being a very, very intelligent and precocious kid, not getting along with other children, and the isolation and the loneliness. Like, I know exactly what that feels like. I read the 4 books in the OG series, and finding out the author was homophobic felt devastating at that age, like being rejected by someone I thought understood my experience. I can speak to that because that is how I felt when I found out about Orson Scott Card's homophobia. Ender, the underdog that Ender is, felt like me. Like, that book really spoke to me, and I think that Ender's Game hit a lot of people because it was for the outcasts. It was for the small, nerdy kids who were bullied and picked on, and it's about finding your way and finding your people and finding your community and fighting for justice, and also getting to be excellent, getting to train yourself in your mind and to hone yourself like a weapon in a good way. It was really devastating when we all found out that he was homophobic. Someone that I love very much says, I love the Simon Snow books, but I don't recommend them as the author wrote some pretty racist stuff in Eleanor and Park. But those books were really my trans awakening as the 2 main gay boys lit a gay fire in me. I own the series and I don't support the author in any other books she writes. I also read Landline and it was for sure a miss. I did love that book too, but I can't really unsee Rainbow's behaviors. I also love Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, but that also has racist remarks in it. I know it's dated, but even still, that makes me very hesitant to recommend. Eleanor and Park was a book that I read that showed me how much work I had to do because I read it right when I started in the book community, and I rated it like 4 stars or super high. I loved it. And then I heard very valid critiques from Asian readers and writers, read the excerpts that they were talking about, and was really disappointed in myself that I missed how wildly racist it was. But it was a growth moment, and I have those moments all the time. And it's just, in those moments, you just have to be humble. You can't get defensive. You just have to listen and grow, because that's the point of all of this. I have not continued on with Rainbow Rowell's works with the exception of Landline, which is a book that I love, but I don't recommend it. The Bell Jar is another book that I have seen in this comment section on this video. I'm not interested in reading Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, even though it has come back in popularity, because again, it's a racist text. I just find it weird that we love the atmosphere of classic literature and the romanticism of classic literature more than we love people of color that are living now. Hundreds of thousands of Sylvia Plaths perished on plantations. Hundreds of thousands of Sylvia Plaths have perished in sweatshops. I am not so thirsty for that era of writing that I'm gonna read Sylvia Plath. It just doesn't work for me. There are plenty of female classic authors who wrote feminist texts that we should be focusing on instead, but do you. This is just me. I have a handful of Stephen King books that I love, and I still have a couple that I own by him and I want to try, but as of recently I've been seeing more and more of the negatives from him and won't be picking any of his newer books up. I do agree with you. I think his legacy is huge at this point, especially with the older generations, but I'm glad to say that I've seen some, not many, but a few diehard King fans get sick of him and his ways. The most painful anti-rec is probably Sylvia Plath. I deeply want to recommend her work as I adore her poetry. And The Bell Jar was such an important and helpful book to me at a dark time in my life. It is, however, a product of its time and contains some racist undertones and references that I'm uncomfortable with. It's a book I still recommend because I don't think these passages take away from the main message, but I give it a trigger warning and a disclaimer whenever I mention it, and I can see why people want to steer clear of it. That is all I ask personally. If you're going to recommend a book that's problematic, just give people a heads up, like, hey, this is the thing, doesn't take away from the message. In my experience, for me personally, it does take away from the message. I'm not interested in cherry picking the good and bad parts of someone. So I'm not gonna cherry pick the good message from your book and just excuse the racism. It just doesn't make sense to me personally, because that does take away from me. Knowing that that's what you really believe about people who look like me and people that are marginalized. Knowing that does take away from this profound message that you're saying, because there is no real love for me and my people in that message. And I'm only interested in love. I'm only interested in mutual respect. Recently fell back into my love for fairy tale manga, but I just can't recommend it. The female characters really get too sexualized and there are so many plot holes and other stuff, which are spoilers. Still, the manga shaped me, so I will always have a soft spot for it. I need to get back into reading manga. I know that I loved the Confidential Confessions manga when I was a kid, but I don't know if they are problematic. I would like to go back and reread them. Sorry, an eyelash fell in my eye. Oh my god, all my life I had to fight. Oh god. Oh my god, Ender's Game is one of my favorite books that I cannot recommend because of the issues y'all mentioned. I was so utterly gutted by finding out about that author's bullshit. I am also a huge fan of It by Stephen King, but I can't recommend the book ethically because of the sexualization of children in that book. Pretty blatant stealing from indigenous cultures. He does this in Pet Sematary, which was also a red flag, even though I enjoyed that one too. Dana also says, I can't separate the art from the artist until the author is dead because I can't bring myself to support a living person I know is awful. And some people are like that. Some people are, I'll support the artist after they die. No matter how you decide to move about and approach problematic literature, it's your choice, but you have to think through that choice. Your own ethics, the person that you really want to be. That then is going to guide you in how you're going to approach these books from your own way, in a way that makes sense to you. I have a list of books I want to recommend but can't due to the fact that they contain moments I know a lot of people won't want to experience. Two books on this list are Earthlings by Sayaka Murata and The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Finally read A Little Life last summer and it's officially on that list too. Came very close to throwing it in the river at multiple points throughout the story, but didn't because it was the library book. I wish sections of the book containing so much truth and relevance hadn't been overshadowed by scenes described in a way that made me want to do things I knew I'd regret.
Jumping in to say we were laughing because I thought that this person was saying like, oh, I would tear apart the book. But now listening back, I'm wondering if this person was saying that the things that they would regret is self-harm, which is not funny.
A lot of conversations Jude had with his friends and Harold mirror experiences I've had with people in my life. So it could just be that I was upset by the book making direct eye contact with a face I'm not comfortable wearing. Whew, what an amazing comment. The overall shape of the story frustrated me in that it seemed as though by the end, for all the paragraph detailing the ways in which life tethered life, all Hanya Yanagihara wanted to say was give up, give up, give up. One of the most profound criticisms that I have heard for A Little Life, that for folk who are amputees, who are disabled, who have survived trafficking, many of them have said that this book made me feel like I shouldn't be alive, made me feel worthless, made me feel that the only end, the only way out, that my life is nothing but trauma and suffering because I'm disabled and the only escape is going to be death. And mind you, we've heard the exact opposite opinion from other people within the community, but that's because people are nuanced. Love this comment. A book like that is Wonder by R.J. Palacio. I loved it, but when I read it and still thinking the author did a fantastic job of telling the same story from different perspectives and portraying the way children and young teenagers see the world. However, I've heard some not great things about the disability representation, and as an able-bodied person who can't judge the quality of the rep myself, I'd feel uncomfortable recommending this book. Oh, and they said that my necklace looks stunning. I hope this one does. This was also a moment where I had to realize that I had erred. When I read Wonder, it was my first year on BookTube, and I didn't see any issue with the way that disabled bodies were represented, and now I absolutely see the issue. What I said in my comment a year ago was, oh my god, I did a video when I first started where I read that book and watched the film and praised the shit out of it, but haven't thought about the book since or re-examined its depiction. Definitely appreciate this comment and you for calling that out. But that's me, and I would love input from other people. This comment I think is really important. 13 Reasons Why would be my pick. I don't love it anymore and have a lot of issues with it now, but the book came out when I was 17 in a state of psychosis for over a month, and I was very much not wanting to be here. I had that similar thing where I wanted to read things relating to my trauma because it helped me deal with it. At the time, I didn't think Hannah's story was traumatic enough for me to care about that deeply, but I loved how she stopped existing and the plans she put into place. That was really inspirational to me and kept me alive for a few months. I can't ethically recommend it because the author is gross, multiple accounts of sexual harassment. In the book, I don't think sexual assault or unaliving were handled that well, and it arguably romanticizes unaliving far too much considering it's written for teenagers. But I know that it really did help me when I needed help the most. It gave me a solid reason to talk about things and validated a lot of what I was feeling. Genuinely, I don't know who I would be or if I would be if I hadn't read that book. But I'm aware it's also caused a lot of harm to other mentally ill people, sexual assault victims, etc. Someone else says, oh my god, I DNF'd Rage of Dragons. Really wish there was a better covering your eyes emoji. I couldn't with the way women were treated. The plot didn't start until the end of part 1. This other person writes a really insightful comment about Stephen King, who is by far the most popular response. I've read King's books for 15 years now and I own almost all of his books. Honestly, that's so impressive. I started reading those as a teenager and I found them entertaining. Since then, I've become a more critical reader and I recognize the multiple issues in his work. Even though the last few books have been nothing but disappointing, I keep picking his books up because he can tell a good story. Maybe one day he will surprise me and write a book that doesn't have 1,000 slurs, and his new favorite thing to write seems to be overly sexualized lesbians, so I would appreciate stopping that. Yay. I feel the same about Stephen King. I've never read anything from him before when I started the Dark Tower series, and it was really good. I loved it, but I just can't ever recommend it or him. On top of my mind would be Mists of Avalon and the Dark Over series by Marion Zimmer Bradley. I think besides her personal massive shortcomings, of which I only learned after her death, she paved the way for a lot of female characters and authors in fantasy. I think it's different if an author is problematic in their personal life or in their public appearance.
So apparently Marion Zimmer Bradley wrote a lot of lesbianism, and there's this book?
Is it different for you if an author is problematic in their personal life or in their public appearance? And by public appearance, I'm assuming like the things they write in their book or how they treat, but this could also be how they treat people when they're in public. It by Stephen King is the book that hit me the most. I read it just after my dad took his life and I was also bullied really bad. The book is very much about childhood trauma, and as a teen and an adult, I just identified so much with the characters. However, there's so much wrong with it, like opening with a grueling gay bashing scene, 80-ish pages, the racism, and the what the fuck underage sex scene. Gross. I didn't realize that that scene was 80 pages. Yikes. Personally, I quite like Colleen Hoover books, but I recognize quite a few issues within them and what's being talked about and what's come to light with her son and the handling of that situation. At the moment, I won't recommend her. At the time of learning about the criticisms against Colleen Hoover in particular, how the relationship is between her and her son, I remember when I heard about that, did a deep dive and looked into it, but I can't, sitting here right now, remember the issue. Colleen's son Levi has come into the public eye after sexual harassment allegations surfaced against him on social media. Colleen Hoover and her son were called out on Twitter regarding sexual harassment. In a tweet on February 12, 2022, a Twitter user contributed to a thread saying her son sexually harassed me and she blocked me when I spoke up about it to her. Those of you who are educated on Colleen Hoover and the situation, let's talk about it in the comment section down below. My beloved Nkechi says, a series I once loved but I don't think I can recommend would have to be the Tiger's Curse Saga by Colleen Hoover. I can't tell y'all much about it though, since it's been so long since I've read those books.
I think I can guess the problem.
Sometimes you just know a book hasn't aged well, and that's okay. I adore Stephen King and used to devour his books, but I got tired of being smacked in the face with the N-word whenever I read his work.
Getting smacked in the face by the N-word? You mean attending college parties?
Which sucks because I love his books, especially The Stand and the Dark Tower series. There's just no reason to use the word at all. I had the same experience with Eleanor and Park and felt like a fool for not seeing the racist ways Park was written.
Literally.
How did I not see it? But again, racism. It teaches you not to see it. And I think in those moments where you realize that you didn't see racism or you may have done something racist, the best thing you can do for yourself and for the world is to have empathy for yourself in those moments. We are part of a racist society, so therefore it's going to manifest in us, and you have to really truly understand that in your heart so that when you find out that you've done something racist or didn't catch racism, that you don't get all in your head and emotional and defensive about it, so that way you can just do the work. I tried to read A Little Life but had to stop halfway through. I was crying like Hannah. I don't think I'll ever finish it because I don't truly think I'll recover from it. Another amazing vlog. Oh, what a sweetheart. Oh, weird. This person says the concept for these videos is super interesting. Loved both of them, but I have to say 2 minutes and 55 seconds in, there is an Among Us behind y'all. What the fuck is an Among Us? Okay, now we have to go. Now I have to see it.
What
is going on behind me?
Is that an advertisement?
This is supposed to be soothing. Anyway. Okay, so it was an ad. I don't know what an Among Us is though. Someone says, for me, a book like that is Wonder by R.J. Palacio. Or is it Palacio? Palacio.
Oh wait, we already read that comment.
Did I just see Marie Lou's name? No. Continuing from the commenter who said there's an Among Us behind y'all, which I don't like that at all, because I'm picturing some sort of like mythological shade creature standing over me, and we're not a fan of that. The only book I can think of I would anti-recommend is Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. I really enjoyed it, but I'm not forgetting the Realms of Ruin NFT mess that happened. Not like the worst thing, but it was kind of a really situation, and I'm still disappointed about that.
What is happening?
And I apparently had commented and said, what is NFT? Someone said NFTs are a crypto thing, and the idea behind them was to basically try to make exclusivity out of digital files, but keep it kind of like buying a receipt that says I'm the most specialist owner of this file. Okay, people who know more about this situation than I do, comment down below. Someone said, I liked hearing your perspective. Thank you. I read Ender's Game in the late 90s, went on to read more than 40 of his other books. The homophobia had landed him a place on my permanent boycott list, though not until I left the hyper-conservative church I was raised in. The only books I have read more, oh no, of than Card is Stephen King. No. This person also talks about Hanya Yanagihara, says more interesting to me, maybe because I only recently read her work To Paradise. The second book of hers that centers tormented gay men seemed a little odd, but not my place to call her out. Maybe Michael Shermer if we count nonfiction. His book Why People Believe Weird Things was instrumental in how I approach critical thinking, and it turns out that he's a rapist, allegedly, and a creep, well documented. For fiction, some of my others are Piers Anthony, who always seems to have books with teen girls and older men, disgusting, and Dean Koontz, who is a moralizing jackass, but I don't like either of their books enough to recommend them, even without the problematic aspect. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not really sure what a moralizing jackass means, to be perfectly honest. Another person says Miss of Avalon was a book I loved, but I cannot ethically recommend. I think I probably asked this person why, so let's see. I have a huge issue with with myths based on several things. One, it's a King Arthur book, which in and of itself has a lot of misogyny in it, but it's also really offensive from a religious standpoint on my behalf. I'm pagan, and the end messages of the book basically boil down to become a Christian because you can't fight it anyway. I don't have a problem with Christians or Christianity, but I have received this message my whole childhood at the end of a belt, Jesus, and being ostracized by my family community, and it didn't make me want to comply. Also, the author, along with her husband, according to the author's daughter, was extremely abusive. It's sick. We hate to hear that, but I'm glad that that person is not in that environment anymore. And there's another comment saying that, you know, Ender's Game is a book that this person really freaking loves, but can't recommend it because Orson Scott Card is so horrible. I'm honestly surprised that I'm not seeing more comments about J.K. Rowling, but this is likely because she has ruined the series. She has ruined her own legacy to the point where a lot of people who really loved the books as kids just genuinely can't even enjoy it now. It's unfortunate. Another comment, I totally agree with Ender's Game. I didn't know anything about the author's homophobia until I was reading the Shadow series, and there was a scene celebrating a priest who suppressed his urges to be with men and married a woman instead to do his duty of having a family. I was so pissed. I immediately DNF'd and I won't ever read anything from him again. This next comment was one that I was very, very grateful for because it talks about a series of unfortunate events, which I never had an interest in reading as a kid.
And now I kind of know why.
They said a series of unfortunate events. I noticed little things throughout the book, but the henchman's portrayal kind of says it all. I comment and say, I always wondered if I missed out on that series. What's wrong with the henchman? If you're okay sharing, no pressure if not. All, if not most, of Olaf's henchmen are either fat, androgynous, foreign, disabled, or a combination of aforementioned identities. These identities are often described as adding to their scariness and otherness, such as the man with the hook for the hand, or the fat one described as looking like neither a man or a woman. They actually took some of the henchmen characters and changed them for Netflix TV show, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't see the twin geishas in the first episode, for example. Yikes. They contrast heavily with either good characters in the books who are typically able, white, relatively seen as good looking by society. I'm rereading the series, but the only time I remember good characters being disabled or marginalized were the circus folk in book 9. That is really unfortunate. I do remember, I don't know if it was on this video or another video, I do remember seeing a comment about anti-Semitism in these books as well. So I've scrolled past more comments about Stephen King, and someone else says, I think my biggest struggle has been Jay Kristoff. I really enjoyed his characters and writing, although arrogant in Nevernight. I even pushed aside how harmful he was to the disability community, a community I'm a part of because I loved the story. I'm not sure if internally I wanted to be on the bandwagon for him due to his fame in the Bookstagram community, but it caused a lot of pain for me as well as other disabled readers. My heart sinks every time I see someone rave about the Empire of the Vampire. I haven't read Jay Kristoff, and after hearing about him, I have decided that that's an author I'm not interested in ever reading, especially after reading that comment. Someone else says, I enjoyed Rage of Dragons, but the book is hella violent and the class system is suffocating. I can't recommend it as much as it's not for the faint of heart. If you're a person who doesn't like violent fantasies, that definitely is not the book. And it makes sense to why someone who, even if they enjoy a violent fantasy, why they wouldn't feel comfortable recommending a violent fantasy to somebody else who might not enjoy it as much. A book I love but wouldn't feel comfy recommending is It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizinni. It's been a while since I read it, but it's primarily set in a psychiatric hospital. And looking back, I remember certain characters with more stigmatized mental illness, like schizophrenia, being used as comic relief and not given the same respect as the main character, which happens so often in these movies that are set in psychiatric facilities, for example. But yes, of course, in books as well. Also, if I'm remembering correctly, there was a trans character who's not portrayed very well, but I may be thinking of another book. A vampire book I love is The Moth Diaries by Rachel Klein. I don't know if this is the retelling of Carmilla, but you can see the influence that the story had on it. This is about an Eastern Jewish girl who's attending this boarding school and they're entering a new year, and a new student arrives, another Eastern Jew that is even at one stage stated to have similar features to the main, and the girl is also the antagonist. As the story progresses, the main becomes convinced that this new girl is a vampire and that she only wants the main to know. The main becomes frightened for her friends and believes the new girl is out to hurt them. I don't think I need to explain why it may be problematic, but what makes me hesitate is the fact that the new girl has a very negative view of her Jewish roots, and the main character has a more positive view of it and engages with her traditions on a regular level. She also has a massive issue with forced Christian or Catholic traditions at the school that she has to take part in. So part of me wonders if it is more a conversation of an analysis of harmful tropes in the vampire genre as a whole. But I don't recommend it because I'm unsure, and this is just a big issue throughout the book. And I think that that's okay. It's okay to not recommend a book just because you're unsure. That's valid as well. There's nothing wrong about erring on the side of protecting somebody else. But of course, on the flip side, it is, I think, almost always good to tell a person, like, this was just simply what I was uncomfortable with. Maybe it'll be different for you. More comments about Stephen King. This person says, I'm really enjoying The Terror with Dan Simmons, but I am struggling with many parts of it. As an Indigenous Canadian, it's very difficult to read how the Inuit people are talked about, treated. It can be argued that since it's set in the 1800s, it's historically accurate, but I just feel like it isn't handled very sensitively and comes off across as gratuitous. I'm never going to accept historically accurate as an excuse. I'm just done with that excuse. I'm done engaging with it. I'm done trying to explain why that is not the hot take that you think it is. I just can't do it. They're constantly referred to as using slurs. The Inuit people serve only for the white characters to harm or look down on. The other issue I have with it is that the monster in the story is based in Inuit folklore. Of course it is, but it was made up by a white author. He even came with a name that sounds Inuktitut.
Inuktitut, and now you know.
I am close to giving up on the book before finishing, and I really love the setting and how well the claustrophobia and tension is written. Apparently it's a TV series. The TV series handles the racism so much better than the book. That is great. Somebody else adds, I really love The Terror, and I think one of the elements that develops throughout the story is all these white sailors basically thinking, oh, look at these dumb people. And then the novel will show the Indigenous people are both intelligent and truly acclimated to the environment, unlike the men from Erebus and Terror. And more comments addressing Rage of Dragons and the issues in that. We talk about more Stephen King. This comment I'm excited about. I've recently just fallen in love with Jemisin's works and then proceeded to actively recommend her works because I was in love. Just this morning I learned she used her platform to write a very damaging opinion on a trans person, which has caused said trans person to detransition, be hospitalized, gone suicidal, etc. She said she has already written an apology personally to the person. However, this is not the last time she's done this. She's very reckless in using her platform, which in turn intentionally or unintentionally hurt other people. The devastation I felt when I learned this right now is just beyond words. I did truly love her works. However, like you, I seem to be incapable of separating artists from their art. I'm not sure if I should continue reading her works. I don't think I'd ever feel comfortable supporting her. It's just a shame because I really want to support Black sci-fi and fantasy authors and feel really uncomfortable canceling them because they already receive harsher treatment than white authors. And I absolutely agree with that.
To lend some more nuance to the situation, this all started because someone wrote an article that says, I sexually identify as an attack helicopter. And people assumed because of the title that this was making fun of non-binary and trans people. It turns out that the author of the article is actually trans and that the title itself was kind of like intentionally inflammatory. So what happens from that point is N.K. Jemisin kind of jumps on the train of dragging this essay or whatever without actually reading it. And then people realize that the author is trans and has become suicidal as the result. This comment on Goodreads, published January 25th, 2020, I really liked and I want to share. I was a fan of her work. I'm still a fan of her work, but a recent pile-on joining a mob that was attacking a trans author has made me like her a lot less. I'm going to ignore this person's comments about cancel culture because I don't agree with them and don't feel like going into it because it's going to derail what we're talking about here. This person also says it's de-stressing when even people who should fucking know better participate. And this is the perfect example of how much harder we are on authors of color who should quote unquote know better. We should not be holding them to an extra harsh standard because that's not the point of this. Some people took it as an attack on trans people and went on a raging counterattack. Most of them didn't read the story, which is the issue here. They just went after the writer, and one of those people was N.K. Jemisin. unreal. She even admitted on Twitter that she hadn't read it, yet she piled on anyway. What the shit? A Black woman who's written her share of problematic characters who didn't even bother to do the diligence of actually reading the story. So again, take this with a grain of salt, because this is somebody who is holding a Black author to a much higher standard than they would a white author, which I inherently don't agree with. But I still like the comment, even if I don't approve of everything in it, and wanted to share.
I have decided that I was comfortable with the apologies that she made. That being said, I think that it is more than valid if that trans person that was harmed is unable to forgive or doesn't forgive because that's their trauma, and that's valid. There's a bunch of reasons why it hasn't made me stop reading her work, and most of those reasons are personal to my Blackness and my transness. I would love to hear more perspectives on the NK Jemisin situation. Yang was also involved in the situation as well, who's also a trans author of color. Ooh, excited about this one. The Weight of Feathers by A.M. Mclemore. I read a couple of their books before with no issues, but seeing this book, maybe I need to do a reread to double check. They use the G slur multiple times throughout the book to portray the main character's racism. And as a white person, I can't ethically recommend a book from my understanding that's hurtful to Romani people. I loved it because it dealt a lot with generational trauma, but at the end of the day, as you said in your video, you shouldn't need a slur to show hate towards a minority group. And there's plenty of other books out there on the subject of generational trauma that I could recommend instead that don't use slurs. Side note, I checked to see if the author might be Romani or something despite the Latinx name, and no, they just write deeply flawed characters because they were once a deeply flawed internalized homophobe. They say this in an interview or a blog post that I read. I'm a little on the fence about it, but I probably wouldn't recommend the original Percy Jackson series. This I'm excited to read. There's some racist and anti-Black tropes in there that I didn't recognize when I was a kid. The ADHD and dyslexia rep meant so much to me as a kid, but there are still many issues with it. It sucks because Riordan seemed to learn from his mistake with that series, and I think he apologized and did a much better job with the Heroes of Olympus and Trials of Apollo. So I still read his books, but I'm not sure I could recommend anyone, especially BIPOC, get into his old books now. And I think apologies and letting that person move forward with their changed behavior is very, very important. Anti-Rex. I loved The Vampire Academy when I read it. I was like 15, and not gonna lie, it's still a guilty pleasure that I revisit once in a while. As an adult, I recognize the main relationship as problematic, being both a mentor student and a 23-year-old with a 17-year-old. I just mentally age the character up when I read, but I won't recommend that series to anyone, especially teens. Also, anything Patricia Briggs writes. I was in high school when I read the first few Mercy Thompson books, and I enjoyed them. Now I recognize how harmful, namely to Indigenous people, and stereotypical they are, and I will never touch the series again. There's so much cultural appropriation, and I'm ashamed to have liked them when I was younger. Now let's do our final ranking of the most problematic and canceled authors by viewers. All right, I've done my little tally, and the top 3 most canceled are as follows. The number 3 spot being filled by none other than Evan Winters, who wrote Rage of Dragons. I would love to know, from those of you who have continued on with this series, how women continue to be treated. Has it gotten any better? Has the sexism taken a friggin' break? The second most canceled author is Hanya Yanagihara for intentionally seeking out to traumatize readers and depicting disabled folk in ways that many people have greatly differing opinions on, especially those who are a part of disabled communities. And coming in at number 1, the most canceled author, the author that readers love the most but can't ethically recommend, is none other than Stephen King. We had other authors that were noteworthy and mentioned, such as T.J. Klune, George R.R. Martin. We didn't talk really about that in the video, but there were like 339 comments to get through. So I think I did a decent job of pulling comments of books that aren't really often talked about, and then popular books as well. But The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath came up. So it was a good range of classics and nonfiction to adult fantasy and literature. And I think that that's important because there's no genre that's more problematic than the other, right? Because it's all about human beings who are composing these stories, telling these stories. I really appreciate all of you who take the time to comment on my videos, and those of you who don't, those of you who just watch the videos and support in that way, that means a lot to me. This video wouldn't be what it is without you and your input. This channel wouldn't be what it is without you and your input. If you want to show me that you made it this far in this video, why don't you comment down below with the word viewer, or you can put like an eye emoji, and it's a good way for you to comment in case you're one of those people that's like, I want to leave a comment but I don't know what to say. This is the part of my video where I tell y'all that you need to join my Patreon. My Patreon is amazing. I love it. I love my patrons. I love the space that we have there. We have an incredible book club. We do really fun watch-alongs. We've done watch-alongs for shows like American Gods. There's a Korean survival island TV show that we're currently watching, and we are about to start what I'm still trying to name it. I don't know if it's going to be Throwback Thursday or Slaps or Stale. I haven't figured it out because I haven't set on a fun catchy name, but it's going to be a series where we take a movie that was beloved, a cult classic, and then we rewatch it to see if it holds up. The first movie that we're going to be doing for this watch-along series is She's All That. I'm excited to see whether or not this holds up. Has it aged well? I know we're gonna do 10 Things I Hate About You. I share behind the scenes excerpts, updates, and with the top tier patrons, I share excerpts from my 2 upcoming novels, Suddenly in Love and Robin Hood. But if you wanna stalk me anywhere else, my social media links are down below. Be good to yourselves, be good to others, and I can't wait to see you in my next video. Bye.